This clever laptop uses the same chassis as the popular Gigabyte A5X1 gaming laptop, and this one is the Apex 15 from XMG. My configuration has the 8-core Ryzen 9 5900HX CPU, 32 gigs of memory, and NVIDIA RTX 3070 graphics which power the 1080p 240Hz screen. There are other specs including lower tier CPU and GPU though. You can check out updated prices with the links down in the description. The whole laptop has a matte black finish. The lid is metal, but the interior and bottom panels are plastic, and there are no sharp corners or edges. The laptop alone weighs about 2.1 kilos or 4.7 pounds, or 3 kilos or 6.6 pounds with the 230 watt brick and cables. It's approaching the thicker side for a 15-inch laptop, but we'll see if this extra space helps keep things cool soon. My laptop has a 15.6-inch 1080p 240Hz screen, but there are other panels available. Unfortunately, there's no FreeSync, but other panel options will offer that, and it's not possible to disable Optimus for a speed boost. I thought it looked fine for a gaming laptop. I'd probably want better color gamut for content creation personally. It's just able to surpass 300 nits at full brightness, so a fairly average panel so far, but once we consider screen response time, we can see where it really shines. I measured average gray to gray response time at 4 milliseconds, which is excellent, and is slightly below the 4.16 milliseconds needed for transitions to occur within the refresh window with just a little overshoot. Here's how it compares with other laptops that I've tested. So one of the better results that I've measured so far. There was pretty much no backlight bleed in my unit, but this will vary between panels. There's a 720p camera above the screen in the middle, but no IR for Windows Hello. This is what the camera and microphone look and sound like. Here's what it sounds like to type on the keyboard. And this is what it sounds like if we set the fan to full speed. So you can still hear me okay over the fan noise. The keyboard has RGB backlighting with 4 levels of key brightness. All keys and secondary functions get lit up, but it's just a single zone of lighting, so the whole keyboard is the same color without further customization. The keyboard wasn't anything special, just the standard one that seems to be in a lot of clever units. I liked typing with it and didn't have any issues. Here's how typing sounds to give you an idea of what to expect. The power button is separate to the keyboard and above it on the right, so no chance of an accidental mispress. The precision touchpad doesn't click down as it's got separate left and right click buttons. It felt very accurate and I liked using it. Fingerprints hardly show up on the dark finish, and as a smooth surface, it's easy to clean with a microfiber cloth. On the left from the back there's a Kensington lock, the power input, air exhaust vent, and 2 USB 3.2 Type A ports. One is Gen 1 and the other Gen 2, but I can't tell which is which. My early sample appears to have a micro SD card slot, but there's no reader in there, and I've been advised this won't be in the final model. On the right from the front there are separate 3.5mm mic and headphone jacks, an ancient USB 2.0 Type A port, and an air exhaust vent on this side too. The rest is on the back between what appears to be 2 more air vents. However, only the left one is an actual air exhaust vent. From left to right there are mini DisplayPort 1.4 and HDMI 2.1 outputs, 2.5 gigabit Ethernet, and a USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type C port with DisplayPort 1.4 support. There's no Thunderbolt, and Type C can not be used to charge the laptop. However, all 3 display outputs connect directly to the NVIDIA graphics, allowing you to bypass Optimus. The front just has some status LEDs towards the right. No groove to help opening it, but it was still easy enough to open up without issue. There's some lid flex and keyboard flex, but the keyboard is removable and it's primarily a plastic chassis. It felt fine during regular day-to-day use though. It's got a 4-cell 49 watt-hour removable battery inside, an uncommon feature. So if you're able to buy spares, then in theory you could quickly remove the battery and swap in a new one without tools. The battery life wasn't anything amazing due to the smaller battery size, not quite lasting 5 hours in my YouTube playback test, but when you consider you could easily double this with a brief intermission to swap the battery, it could definitely keep you going for a while. Underneath there are air vents directly above the intake fans. It was easy to open up with the pry tools linked in the description. There are 12 Phillips head screws to remove and another 3 under the battery. Inside we've got the space for the battery up the back corner, 2 M.2 storage slots down the front on the right, 2 memory slots next to that, the Wi-Fi 6 card to the left of that, and 2.5-inch 7mm drive space on the far left. The 2 speakers are found on the left and right sides down the front. I thought they sounded average. They were a bit tinny sounding and hurt my ears at maximum despite the tool not actually reporting it getting super loud, and the latency mon results weren't too bad. The BIOS is pretty standard for a clever laptop. Unfortunately, there aren't that many options available by default, just the standard basic things you'd expect as I'm showing here. Let's check out thermals next. The control center software lets us change between different performance modes, which from lowest to highest are silent, entertainment, and performance. We've also got the option of adjusting fan speed or simply setting the fans to maximum. Now, despite being a HX processor, I didn't see any software utility provided by Clever for actually overclocking the CPU, and there wasn't anything in BIOS either. So it seems that we're just getting the stock advantages of the HX chip, which is higher clock speeds compared to say the 5800H. The idle results down the bottom were cool enough in my 21°C room. The stress test results were measured with the AIDA64 CPU stress test with stress CPU only checked, and the Heaven GPU benchmark at max settings run at the same time. The CPU seemed to be thermal throttling at 95°C, and this was happening even with the fans at max speed and the cooling pad in use. The GPU was thermal throttling in silent mode, but as you'll hear soon, this mode is running the fans very quietly, so that's kind of expected. These are the clock speeds for the same tests. The GPU speed rises significantly outside of silent mode because the thermal throttling is removed with faster fans. The CPU speed only rises a little going from entertainment to performance mode as this boosts fan speed, and the cooling pad only gave us an extra 100 MHz or so, as this helped address the thermal throttling. The GPU was running up to 130 watts in these CPU plus GPU stress tests, while the CPU was getting above 40 watts, though it was still being limited in thermals in this test, which is why higher wasn't observed. Here's how an actual game performs with these different modes in use. Performance and entertainment mode were about the same, and silent mode was still able to offer great performance despite being much quieter, as you'll hear soon. Using an external monitor also boosts performance, as shown by the top result, as this bypasses Optimus. Here's how CPU-only performance looks in Cinebench. The 5900HX was able to take the lead for best multi-core score I've ever seen from a laptop so far, and the single-core score is up there too, only being slightly beaten by the 4-core Intel Tiger Lake chips. Here's how these same laptops are performing when running on battery power. We're losing a fair amount of performance here when compared to other Ryzen laptops ahead of it, but despite this, the multi-core score is still better than any of the Intel models, though single-core is down quite a bit. The keyboard area was in the low 30s when idling, pretty normal stuff and cool to the touch. It was warm in silent mode, but not hot feeling. Not too bad considering the lower fans, as you'll hear next. Entertainment mode was cooler despite performing better because the fans are actually louder now. Performance mode was warmer, but still not hot to the touch. And this is despite the fans getting even louder. Let's have a listen. The fans were still audible when idle, and what I found interesting was that the fan noise didn't change even with the stress tests going in silent mode. As we saw earlier, despite throttling, it was still able to offer decent gaming performance, so you've at least got the option of playing quieter if that's your preference. Performance mode was only a little louder than entertainment mode, and the fan was maxed out in this workload whether or not I manually set it to max speed, which is why I didn't bother testing temperatures earlier with it manually enabled. Now let's find out how well this laptop performs in games and see how it compares against others. But use these results as a rough guide only, as they were tested at different times with different drivers. I've tested Battlefield 5 in campaign mode at ultra settings, and the Apex 15/A5 is highlighted in red. It's performing similarly to many other 2080 Super Max-Q machines, so not exactly next-gen hardware, but this would in part be due to the lack of ability to disable Optimus. I suspect the differences may be greater at higher resolutions like 1440p too, as we can better load up the GPU, but unfortunately I don't have much data to compare with yet, as this is still a new panel size for laptops. Shadow of the Tomb Raider was tested with the game's benchmark tool with the highest setting preset. The Apex 15 rises up relative to the same selection of laptops, though again it's still reaching the same frame rate as other 2080 Super Max-Q machines. Regardless, still a high frame rate for this test. Far Cry 5 was also tested with the game's benchmark tool at max settings. It lowers down in this game and is right under the Asus G15 with higher tier GPU but lower GPU power limit. This test generally depends more on the processor, and for the most part, laptops that let us disable Optimus are doing better, but at the same time, Intel machines also generally seem to have an edge there. That's not too surprising though, as I recently showed that Intel beats AMD in gaming. Now for the benchmarking tools. I've tested Heaven, Valley, and Superposition from Unigine, as well as Firestrike, TimeSpy, and Port Royal from 3D Mark. Just pause the video if you want a detailed look at these results. Adobe Premiere was tested with the Puget Systems benchmark, and the results were extremely impressive. Just 1 point behind the higher spec and much more expensive MSI GE76. Adobe Photoshop generally depends more on processor performance, and this time the Apex 15 was at the top of the graph. In fact, the top 3 results are all Ryzen 5000 based machines. DaVinci Resolve is more GPU heavy, however it does depend on the processor. Despite the GE76 having a higher wattage RTX 3080 with double the VRAM, it's not quite able to match the 3070 with 5900HX at the top. I've also tested SpecViewPerf, which tests at various professional 3D workloads. Drive speed will of course depend entirely on which you select when ordering. My 512GB NVMe M.2 SSD was doing alright, though nearly half as slow for read speed compared to writes. I booted an Ubuntu 20 Live CD to test Linux support. Out of the box, the speakers, touchpad, keyboard, Wi-Fi, and camera all worked fine, but keyboard and screen brightness adjustments did not. Unfortunately, I can't discuss price at the moment. It's still early and XMG don't have the model available for sale just yet, so you'll have to check out the links in the description to get an idea of what to expect with different specs. Alright, so now let's summarize both the good and the bad to help you decide if this is a laptop worth considering. Overall, the XMG Apex 15/Gigabyte A5X1 is a decent gaming laptop, but as is typically the case with clever laptops like this, the build quality and materials aren't quite as nice as some of those more expensive options from larger brands. But that's partly why these are generally priced better, it's just a compromise. And honestly, I think it's fine, it keeps things competitive and it's not like I had an issue with the build quality. Battery life wasn't great, but the trade-off is that you can completely swap out the battery, which is a pretty uncommon feature these days. Gaming performance was decent, but the RTX 3070 in my model was close to 2080 Super Max-Q machines from last generation, so not exactly next-gen performance. And that's probably in part due to the inability of disabling Optimus, and that my model has a 1080p screen. With the 1440p option, it may do better. In any case, the screen still had great response time and okay color gamut and brightness, though my model didn't have FreeSync. The 5900HX processor seems to be the reason that it's doing so well in CPU and content creator workloads. But unfortunately, the Clevo software and BIOS are pretty limited in that they don't let you actually control the chip. The HX series is supposed to be unlocked, so not being able to do anything isn't great, as we can't take full advantage of what this thing can do. I don't know, it just seems like a bit of a missed opportunity. And also, while we're talking about that, the software in these Clevo machines just needs an update. When I previously reviewed the XMG Neo 15 in this video over here, that Tongfang chassis gives us plenty of option in the software to control power limits. So coming from that machine to this one just makes this one feel like it's a bit behind. The I/O is decent, but USB 2.0 in 2021 is a bit rough. Thermals weren't great. There's plenty of space inside as the chassis is on the thicker side, but as we saw inside, the available space doesn't appear to be utilized well. It looks like they could probably fit in more heat pipes, for instance. In any case, as we've seen, performance of that Ryzen processor is still decent. Though in CPU plus GPU workloads, there was still CPU thermal throttling on the processor at 95 degrees Celsius, even with the fan maxed out and a cooling pad. Anyway, if the price is reasonable and you don't mind running on the warmer side, there's not really too much holding me back from recommending this machine. Again, unfortunately, I don't have prices at the moment, but based on the past, Clevo laptops have generally been competitively priced. And just in regards to the temperatures, keep in mind that I do have the higher spec model here. You could of course get it with the RTX 3060 graphics or 6-core 5600H processor, and those might not get quite as hot as what I've got here. Anyway, that's it. Get subscribed for future laptop reviews like this one, and for now, until the next video, you can check out some of my others over here. So I'll see you over in one of those next.